Okay, I'm going to be reading two passages from The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. This is a hilarious novel, and it's written from the perspective of a boy, Christopher, who has autism. So the two passages I'm reading both kind of focus on the tone that Mark Haddon writes from and his perspective as he's writing from this 15-year-old boy's perspective. And I just think the way he writes is really interesting, and it really helps us get into the mind of Christopher, who is the main character in the novel. So I'll start with the first passage and I'll talk about it a little bit afterwards. This passage is on page 34, and this is Christopher talking here, and he says, "Talking to strangers is not something I usually do. I do not like talking to strangers. This is not because of stranger danger, which they tell us about at school, which is where a strange man offers you sweets or a ride in his car because he wants to do sex with you. I'm not worried about that. If a strange man touched me, I would hit him, and I can hit people very hard. For example, when I punched Sarah because she had pulled my hair, I knocked her unconscious and she had concussion, and they had to take her to the accident and emergency department at the hospital. And also, I always have a Swiss Army knife in my pocket, and it has a saw blade which could cut a man's fingers off." So I like that passage because, like, I think that's one of the first, like in the beginning of the book, where we really kind of just get into Christopher's head, and I think it's hilarious, just like his thought processes, and like they make a lot of sense, but they also make no sense. So this would be a good passage to kind of just have students read and talk about, like, do you ever think that way, or what do you think about the fact that this is how he thinks, or like the words stranger danger are bolded in here, and he does Haddon does that a lot. He does a lot of bolds and italics and lots of different things. Like there's a little map on the next page. So those are interesting like writing techniques that I think could be discussed in the class. This next passage is pretty long. I'm actually going to read the entirety of a chapter because I couldn't figure out where to stop because I like the whole thing. So this is on page 164 and it's chapter 199. And once again, this is Christopher talking, so we're kind of focusing on the tone here and just the way that Haddon writes from the perspective of this 15-year-old. "People believe in God because the world is very complicated, and they think it is very unlikely that anything as complicated as a flying squirrel or the human eye or a brain could happen by chance. But they should think logically, and if they thought logically, they would see that they can only ask this question because it has already happened, and they exist. And there are billions of planets where there is no life, but there is no one on those planets with brains to notice. And it is like if everyone in the world was tossing coins, eventually someone would get 5,698 heads in a row, and they would think they were very special. But they wouldn't be because there would be millions of people who didn't get 5,698 heads. And there is life on Earth because of an accident. But it is a very special kind of accident, and for this accident to happen in this special way, there have to be three conditions. And these are: 1, things have to make copies of themselves. This is called replication. 2, they have to make small mistakes when they do. This is called mutation. 3, these mistakes have to be the same in their copies. This is called heritability. And these conditions are very rare, but they are possible, and they cause life, and it just happens. But it doesn't have to end up with rhinoceroses and human beings and whales. It could end up with anything. And for example, some people say, how can an eye happen by accident? Because an eye has to evolve from something else very like an eye, and it doesn't just happen because of a genetic mistake. And what is the use of half an eye? But half an eye is very useful because half an eye means that an animal can see half of an animal that wants to eat it and get out of the way. And it will eat the animal that only has a third of an eye, or 49% of an eye, instead because it hasn't got out of the way quick enough. And the animal that is eaten won't have babies because it's dead. And 1% of an eye is better than no eye. And people who believe in God think God has put human beings on the earth because they think human beings are the best animal. The human beings are just an animal, and they will evolve into another animal. And that animal will be cleverer, and it will put human beings into a zoo, like we put chimpanzees and gorillas into a zoo. Or human beings will all catch a disease and die out, or they will make too much pollution and kill themselves. And then there will only be insects in the world, and they will be the best animal." So I think that passage has a lot you could dissect in it. First of all, we have the list of the three conditions for life to happen, and lists is another thing that Haddon uses a lot in this novel, which I think is an interesting way to write a novel. It's something different from what we usually see. And then just his entire logic and reasoning he's using here about God and whether or not God exists and how life came to be is definitely, like, it's actually you could kind of use these ideas in maybe like a science class as well. But these kind of jumped out to me because I believe in God, and so I'm trying to follow his logic here and see if I can make sense of it. And I don't make sense of a lot of it, but that's okay. But some of it does make sense. And so I think these both would be really good practices just to engage students in trying to get into the mind of Christopher and try and see if they can think in similar ways he does or challenge the things he says or either of those things to kind of try and interpret the text.